I am fascinated by this comment that I received today. The video was called Question: Do Americans View People from Spain as White? Answer: no. And that was my opinion as an American, that we don't tend to see Spanish people as white people. Ultimately, I think more so than any reason, is because when we think of someone who's Spanish, it is nearly impossible for us to differentiate someone who's Spanish versus someone who is mixed Native American, because when we hear people speaking Spanish and we see people, we associate Spain with the traits of the people who are technically, in theory, biracial. You know, the typical Mexican person is somewhere around half Native American, Mayan, Aztec, or whatever, and half Spanish, European, but ultimately Spanish, notably more than the other regions and parts of Europe. So when we think Spanish anything, we think of a person who's not white. And you can criticize us all day long for that, but it's ultimately a cultural perception. And I don't really know that that's ever going to change. You either accept it, or you can say, all Americans are stupid, especially this guy right here. He's stupid because he said that Spanish people aren't white. I'll accept that. I've accepted countless people telling me that all day long. I accept that. But my role here is to teach you about why that misconception exists about Spanish people. Because ultimately, and I'm telling you the truth, I've never met a person from Spain in my life. I've never met a Spanish person. I've met people who are Hispanic and Latino, but I've never once met a person from Spain, and I've never been to Spain. I'd like to go to Spain, but I've never been there. Well, Nick, why don't you go to Spain right now? Do we really need to have this conversation? All right, fine. So I'm married, I have 2 kids, I have a full-time job, I have like 3 side jobs. So I'm just going to take off 2 weeks. We're gonna go visit Spain. It's not practical. It's just not. So sorry. I would love to pay my way, invite me to stay at your home. Maybe we can do that. But for right now, I can't just come to Spain because, yeah, I know Spain's great. I know that. And maybe one day I can. All right. So here's the comment. Quote, "Hi, I am from Spain. I need to say sorry for the bad English, but I need to say this message, and I hope you will understand it. You are not white in my country. You don't have the standards to be considered a white person in Spain. But I suppose that you were born in the United States." End quote. And that's from our friend David Escobar. So if I'm understanding this right, and I don't see anything that was bad about the English, but if I'm understanding this right, what he's saying is, maybe ironically, that whereas it's difficult for me to view Spanish people as white because of the preconception I have on having a concept of what Spanish people are, ironically, people in Spain wouldn't see me as a white guy because of the Native American DNA that I have, which is the very reason it's hard for me to see Spanish people as white, even though they don't have the Native American DNA. So yes, I totally admit I'm in the wrong here. My perception is wrong and it's warped. And the more I make these videos, the more I'm able to progress where I need to be. It's not going to change the fact that most people in America and the United States, when they hear that someone is from Spain, there's really no differentiation between someone being in Spain or someone being Mexican. They put them all in the same category as if they had the same DNA, which they don't. So I think that's interesting. Let's talk more about this. Let's grasp this. So, and if you're in Spain watching this, please verify. If you saw me at a cafe, saw this guy, you heard my accent and oh, he's an American. If you saw me, you looked at me, and let's do a side profile in case you need that, in case that's important. Would you think that guy's not white? Not only is he's an American, but he's clearly Native American. He's of a different race mixed in. He's not. We can't consider this guy white. So is that true? Is that how people in Spain would see me, as a guy who's not white? And what's funny, I don't know, a year and a half ago I made a video with my mom, and I asked my mom. So by the way, my mom, her mother's Mexican. And I mean, like, in theory, my grandmother, who's Mexican, would have been like 88% Native American, Mayan, Aztec, or whatever, based on what percentage of Native I am, because I'm like 21% or something like that. So in theory, she'd have to be pretty high on the scale and actually not have much actual Spanish or Iberian DNA, according to that. But I asked my mom in a video, and I didn't tell her what the video was about. I just had her agree to do the video, and I asked her, do you consider yourself a white woman? And she thought about it for 2 seconds and says no. And it's interesting because that would back up the theory that Spanish people don't see people who are of Mexican descent to be white. Now, and again, another cultural warning. A lot of people hear me talk about being Mexican and they're like, oh, but there's Chinese people. How can you? No. When Americans talk about Mexicans, as far as their ethnicity, we're talking about that predictable common mix of Native American and of Spanish European. That's what we're talking about. That we're saying it from that perspective. So that's another thing to kind of learn culturally about Americans if you're not familiar with that. Because I've had so many people try to correct me on it. I'm like, okay, well, maybe I'm wrong, but when the whole country believes that and sees that, we have to cater to other people's perceptions, even if their perceptions are incorrect. So what you're seeing even now as I make this video is you're seeing me even still struggle with all that. To think that I'm not a white guy, but it's funny because ultimately, people in the United States, people have asked about it. I'm like, once they find out what my DNA is, I think with this one guy, Sam, he said, oh yeah, I always thought you kind of look Spanish. But he didn't mean it in the way like from Spain. He actually meant Native American via something Latin America, Mexico, something like that. That's how he meant it, because that's how people in America mean it. The idea of what a Spanish person looks like, and I've made videos about this too. If you show me a person from Spain and a person who was Mexican, I wouldn't necessarily correctly guess who was the Mexican versus who was the person from Spain. It would take a lot of practice for me to do that. And what's funny though, is earlier today I did see someone from Italy, and he was from Milan, or however you say it. Yes, I know. Here in America, the education system has failed us because they didn't teach us enough about geography. Okay, there we go. I'm all the many reasons people leave these comments to correct me. I'm just trying to get ahead of them. That's all. But anyway, he was from Italy, and fair skin, blue eyes. His accent was different, but I couldn't pinpoint what it was because he wasn't the official Italian guy like the Mario and the pizza like we see here in America. So when I saw this guy with fair skin, blue eyes, I would never have thought he was from Italy, but I found out that's where he's from. He's from Italy. So we have this whole concept of like, and we do this with Italians too. We have this idea that if you're Italian, you've got olive skin, dark features. We do this to people with Spain, but we probably do it more to people in Spain because we're still going back to that Native American DNA. So it's interesting how I would be perceived. Here in America, ultimately, I don't think most people would even question it until I bring it up, that they would think about that I would be anything that can be considered biracial, which I understand race is a social construct and therefore biracial is, I accept that. But ultimately, comparatively speaking, I think most people, until they know, they just assume I'm just another white guy. So put the same perceived white guy over in Spain, and they can see the Native American DNA. I mean, let me just, so can you see the Native American DNA? You be the judge. How obvious is that? And if it's obvious in me, then it's obvious in people who are even more than I am. So I think that's very interesting. The concept that I would not be a white guy in Spain. Because I've already made videos talking about how I get it that like if I were to go to Ireland or Wales or England or Scotland, people would assume, if nothing else, if they didn't hear me speak, they'd assume at least that I was from Southern Europe, because of those predictable mixes that happen. But even then, if you're European and you have Jewish and Middle Eastern DNA, that wouldn't necessarily disqualify you from being white, would it? Here in America, the Jewish thing, I don't think we're still quite sure how we feel if that's a different race or not, because they are Middle Eastern people of Middle Eastern descent. But if it's someone from like Iran or Iraq or something like that, we tend to see that as a different race. But again, race is all a social construct. We invented this idea. So it ultimately is silly to try to define it and understand it. But to another degree, I think it's intelligent to be able to have these open discussions and try to figure out our own perceptions, other people's perceptions of us, even if they're completely flawed. Still though, if most people believe that, there's part of us that has to accept that's how it is over there. I can't relate to it, but I can at least accept that it is different over there. Here in America, I don't think most people would see me as not white. But is that true? People in Spain would see me as a guy who's not white because of that Native American DNA, which again is like 21% according to MyHeritage. Tell me more right here. I want to learn.